Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cit Echo. It's good to see you guys. As usual, we'll get started with introductions of those connected online. First person I see is Kim McManus.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim McManus. I'm the project coordinator for Cit Echo.
Looks like Dr. Rosenbaum is logged on.
Yes, I'm here. Niels Rosenbaum with APD Psychiatry.
I see our esteemed presenter, Lieutenant Panzer.
Lieutenant Panzer retired now, so just retired like a week ago. So yes, I'm doing the presentation. I was the commander of the CIT unit and officer wellness unit for our department.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us and congratulations on retirement.
Thanks.
I see Detective Jones connected.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Detective Jeff Jones with the APD Crisis Intervention Unit.
I see clinician Megan Aragon.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Megan Aragon, clinician with the Crisis Intervention Unit.
I see Brittany Martinez. Not sure if you have a mic. All right, I see Jeff Cummings.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jeff Cummings, APD, Field Services.
Welcome. I see Detective Dye.
Detective Joe Dye, the Crisis Intervention Unit, Albuquerque Police Department.
Looks like Detective Mira is joining us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Detective Shannon Mieta with APD CIU.
We have Margaret White.
Hi, everyone. I'm the case management social worker for UNM's Dean of Students Office and Student Health and Counseling.
Awesome. Welcome. I see Officer Engel.
Officer Matthew Engel with the APD Field Services Bureau.
I see Chief Magia Capra.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations on your retirement, Lieutenant. And Vic Mangi-Capra is still living the dream at Corrales PD.
I see Betty Lou Chavez.
Hi, everyone. Betty Lou Chavez with the Downtown Public Safety Substation, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Looks like Lieutenant Brian Price is connected.
Lieutenant Brian Price, APD Southwest Area Command.
Welcome, LT. Looks like we have Tim Brown. He doesn't have a mic, but he's retired law enforcement out of Loveland, Colorado. We have Lisa Chavez, who is a member of COAST here at APD, also without a mic. And Brian Carter, I believe, out of Rio Rancho, Rio Rancho PD has no audio either. I think I got everybody. If I didn't, just give me a heads up and I'll get you introduced, send me a message. We're going to do our case first today because Detective Jones, who's going to present the case, may have to duck out for sort of a dire police need here in a minute. But are you ready to go, Detective Jones?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. All you.
Okay, well, today's presentation is on the Albuquerque Police Department's the first time that the department has used the extreme risk firearm protective order. This was a law that was passed, I believe, in early 2020. I know that it went into effect in May 2020, and the intent of the law was to have a mechanism to obtain and store firearms for up to a year of consumers who had shown a risk to themselves or others. So the law is, at least in my estimation, it's fairly onerous. There's a lot of work involved in getting the extreme risk protective order, but the Crisis Intervention Unit did obtain one last Wednesday. So this concerns, this case study kind of concerns that. So the consumer is a 37-year-old man who lives in Albuquerque. The consumer is a military veteran and has prior diagnoses of bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. So all of this started last week when police were dispatched last Monday. I believe that'd be the 23rd, to the consumer's home concerning a mental health crisis. They got there, they spoke to a family member who does not live with the consumer. And they reported that the consumer had said that he was going to kill grandmothers, plural. And it also made a threat that he was going to have his people get the family member's spouse. So the consumer receives services through one of the facilities here in Albuquerque. The family got a hold of that facility and a certificate for evaluation was issued for this man. The patrol officers then got a hold of the crisis intervention unit, and we discussed the field officers going out and trying one more time. So they went out again on Tuesday of last week. And at this time, the consumer drove at the officers in a car, backed up, got out of the vehicle, ran around the house, his home, was partially clothed and then ran back in the house, but did not allow much contact with officers, and they disengaged. Oh, let me back up. I forgot about what happened Monday. Monday, when officers went out to serve the certificate for evaluation, they did contact the consumer. He wouldn't come out of his house, and he said he had firearms. So fast forward to Tuesday, when he was acting erratically out of his house, he went back in. The officers were aware that he had firearms, and they disengaged. So they contacted the crisis intervention unit again Tuesday. Crisis intervention unit detective spoke with the consumer at length Tuesday evening, and ultimately this man agreed to come out peacefully. So it was a good initial resolution to what had happened. He came out peacefully. He was detained peacefully. There was no use of force, and was taken to a mental health facility where he remains right now. Afterwards, the relative of the consumer went into the consumer's home and came out with a military style gun case that had been open, laying next to the consumer's bed. And in that gun case was a loaded AR-15 assault rifle with 2 extra loaded magazines, a Glock handgun with multiple loaded magazines, and 2 .45 caliber handguns with multiple loaded magazines. And all of these were right next to the consumer's bed while he was actively in crisis. So this was of high concern for the crisis intervention unit. And we spoke to the family member, and the family member, the law for the extreme risk firearm protective order basically says if a reporting party, if they want to proceed, the police department will assist them. In this case, the family member decided, yes, I want to keep these guns out of this man's hands right now. And so we got started on the process. Basically, the process is a notarized affidavit from the family member, a notarized petition from the police department, in this case, the crisis intervention unit. You take those to district court, and a civil judge reviews that and then decides whether to issue a temporary order or not. In this case, it was issued, and a hearing has been set for a couple of weeks from now. So the process is lengthy. Even after you get the order, there are a lot of hoops to jump through in regards to serving the consumer, serving him paperwork with receipts of the guns. There are multiple other parties that need to be contacted, including the sheriff's department. And so we're in the middle of this right now, hoping to make a little headway that other folks in APD and other agencies can use to make this streamlined, because it has been anything but streamlined. The court, when we go to the court said this is the first time one's been issued in the 2nd Judicial District. And so it's been a little muddy, but we're working our way through it. So.
Thanks, Detective Jones. Instead of the normal, recap, I think we're just going to have a discussion about this. I know that these laws, these emergency gun restraining order laws, have been a little bit controversial, but this sort of seems like the kind of case that they were made for, and I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees with me on the network about that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Do you guys have, it's a NICS form? When someone is involuntarily committed, the judge should be signing off on the NICS, or saying, not allowed federally to possess, own firearm, blah, 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 which means he can either turn those over, or you could actually arrest him for being in violation of that law. So I don't know if you guys have done that before. I know I did it very few, but commanders were well above my rank were a little iffy on it, even though the law's on our side.
Right.
So I had to kind of tread carefully on that, but I was just curious because I have done it before.
I think treading carefully is the exact way we would describe that as well. We do have access to NICS, and people get entered into it, and then we've asked the ATF to help if we know they have guns, but they're not supposed to, and the ATF won't take on the case, of course. So it became this thing.
Pesky little federal law that they haven't repealed yet. That's like, I don't know, a gazillion years old.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. And so, we got this where we can go and take someone's guns, even if they haven't been found incompetent in an official capacity or domestic violence situations. But there has been some controversy, Second Amendment rights and stuff. And so this was actually the first one that, Jeff, do you know if it's the first one APD's done or the first one in New Mexico?
It's the first one that APD's done. It's the first one that's been done in the 2nd Judicial District, which is the largest, like population-wise, judicial district in New Mexico. It's not the first one in New Mexico. When I was talking to the judge this morning, she said she is aware of a couple of them in Santa Fe County. And I think I'd heard a news report that there had been something like 9 of them done since the law went into effect in May 2020.
Any questions, comments from the network about the process or, about the law in general? Did you guys have to involve the DA's office at all?
The DA's office will not. We called the DA because the law said, there's a couple of parts in the law that are supposed to involve the DA. One is if we get information that we don't believe meets the threshold of probable cause that this person is a threat to themselves or others because of the firearms, we're supposed to run it by a DA. And so as I started, as the crisis intervention unit was putting this together last week, we reached out to the DA, and their on-call DA said, we've been told not to give any advice at all on extreme risk firearm protective orders. They referred us to the city attorney's office, which was of some help.
Yeah, very helpful of them to pass the buck. Any comments, any questions for Jeff about this process?
Go
ahead.
I'm just going to give more information to Lieutenant Panzer. A lot of times our state works to not involuntary commit somebody. They'd rather have them voluntary commit. And so it takes away a lot of our ability to put them in NICS, and we have those forms to fill out and sign, but our state will work more to, if they can't have the person voluntary commit instead of having them court order committed on it.
I've got one thought for the folks on the network, especially the provider side. Serving this is very risky for law enforcement. In this case, we took these guns into, in for safekeeping because the mom was willing to go into the house and get us the firearms. But say, that isn't the case, and we still want to try to get these firearms. Well, this law requires us to go over, bang on the consumer's door and say, can we please have your guns and can you bring them to the front door, essentially, which is a tactical mess for law enforcement. It's not the way, I believe it's a poorly written law, and I think it's a high risk for law enforcement. In this case, We have the guns. We took them into safekeeping. But I believe that in the past, when law enforcement is trying to gain access to consumers that are inpatients in facilities for purposes of things like serving legal paperwork, I think we get rejected. I think that if we've got a consumer in one of these facilities and we've got the paperwork for an extreme risk firearm protective order, I'd really like the facilities to take a hard look at allowing us to do it there, because I think this is going to escalate consumers. I mean, if a person goes to the trouble and expense of having a gun collection, and then their gun collection is taken from them, even if it's just for mostly, as much as a year, they're going to be upset about it. I understand that. I own guns myself. But to go knock on the door after somebody's been released from a facility and say, oh, guess what? Your guns aren't coming back here, or I want all your guns. And your mom filled out a petition for that helped us to get this done. I think it's going to escalate them. I really like to see if facilities could possibly look into allowing us in to get this paperwork to them. And this is my phone call. I have to leave, and I apologize.
No problem. Thanks, Detective Jones. Any final thoughts? Any thoughts for the providers on the network, like Jeff was asking?
Hey, Ben, I have a question, sir.
Sure.
Well, question's kind of needing some feedback. So for those who don't know, my wife works at the VA. She works in suicide prevention. And when I tend to take these calls for service where there's a veteran, as a veteran myself, I tend to jump those calls. Every time I take them to the VA and I try to meet with the nurse practitioner, the provider, whomever it is, the consistent thing I'm getting from them as a request, I think it would go both ways, is they're trying to find a bridge to connect what we have about a veteran and the information and the critical events that are happening and tying it in so the VA knows. And when the VA is catching wind on stuff, when we have C4 East and we also don't have any background to help us in the field to understand what exactly this is. I can always try to find the provider and the supervisor, send it to you, Ben, if you want. But one thing I've definitely been told time and time is, how do we connect with you guys? Because we bring you here, but we don't know who they are, and we can't get the help you guys need to make sure you don't get into a situation.
Yeah, so what you're describing is an issue that we've had with multiple hospital systems. And I think Doc Rosenbaum actually helped get a memorandum of understanding with the UNM hospital system, so they could share that information back and forth. If you don't have that, there's like a bunch of HIPAA laws and frankly, a lot of people that are just afraid to talk about that stuff to police. So I don't know, Doc, would that be possible to get a memorandum of understanding with the VA? And can you make that happen personally?
The VA is notoriously tight-lipped. I mean, they don't share anything. They're really hard to work with in general. I mean, the same laws apply, that they can give you information if it's about an emergency. So if it's an emergent situation, they can share information with you. And in some cases, they're obligated to share information with you. Like if someone's actively homicidal or suicidal, they have to warn or take action against that. And you can always tell them anything. Like if they say, we can't confirm or deny that that person's even here at the VA, you say, well, I'm just going to give you all this information. Do whatever you want with it. I'm assuming I have information that they might be there. They also, according to federal law, they're supposed to, they're allowed to share information if there's an official police investigation. So if you're doing an investigation, they should be able to share your information, or if it's a missing persons. That doesn't mean that they will, but you can look up the statute, and that sometimes helps. Like say that's the statute says you can if you want to share this information, and sometimes they do. It's really about finding the right person who will share the information.
Thanks, Doc.
Sure.
The other advice is we work pretty closely with the VA. And so if you have someone that you're transporting for a C of E, looking them up in our SharePoint and contacting the detective that's working that person, if there is one, might be able to get more information from the VA than someone else.
Good to go. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. We had a comment from Tim Brown who said, "This sounds like a perfect case for the ERPO. I certainly hear that the process is lengthy and awkward. It's also risky for the officers enforcing the order. However, you have likely saved at least one life through this extra effort. Thanks for making the time and effort to employ this tool." Thanks, Tim. I agree. Jeff and his team did a good job. And I think if there ever was a case that this was designed for, this certainly met the criteria for it. Other final thoughts? We wrap the case portion up. All right, I'm going to turn this over to our lovely presenter, Lieutenant Panzer. Her presentation is called "Before the Active Shooter." It's a topic that tragically has become more and more common in our country. So really looking forward to your expertise on the matter.
Well, thank you guys, everyone. Really, I'm really happy to be here to help out with this. I'm gonna click on share and hopefully get this thing to work. But if there's anything in here, I'm kind of like gonna go ahead and use my longer presentation and just skip over a few slides here and there, or just briefly cover a few things. There might be a couple things that have changed between now and 2019 when I did that. Especially in regards to New Mexico that's on here. So if they have, please let me know and I can change the slide later on. But let me see what I can do here. Desktop. Why? I don't know why this is not. I may have to quit and come back in. I don't know what's going on, but this never happened before. So
Are you a co-host?
I am.
Okay. And it's just not sharing?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me try something else. I hit the share button. It's just, oh, there we go. There we go. My bad. Sorry about that.
No problem. And we can see your presentation.
Okay, good deal. That's always a double bonus. So usually I co-do this with a forensic psychiatrist that I'm used to working with. So some of this first part of the presentation is actually more legal stuff, dealing with the forensic psychiatric part. So I'm going to go over it a little bit more quickly and maybe a little bit more generally, but I'm going to leave up the notes so I can make sure I touch the highlight points that I don't normally do on this. I usually end up getting to kind of the nuts and bolts. So just kind of a semi disclaimer there. Oh, come on. Me and Vader, that was always fun. Okay, so a little bit of history about how this all transpired. Is anyone here familiar with Tarasov? I'm sure you would be, but so Tarasov is what kind of kicked all this off, and this was way back in the day, in 1976 when this happened. But in broad scopes, this gentleman here on the right became kind of obsessed and very fascinated with the girl on the left. And she was not reciprocating of his affections. Essentially what happened in the long run was that he came to her house looking for her. Mother said, oh, she's here in the house somewhere. And anyway, he went in and he stabbed her. He had seen a psychiatrist on staff at the campus there. He was at University of California. Okay, sorry, doorbell interruption. Anyway, so the doctor said that he was okay, and he was okay to go back to work and school and all that kind of stuff. However, he had made actual comments to the doctor that yes, he wanted to harm this lady, and he let her go. Officers went over, they talked to him, campus officers did. They said, oh, he's fine, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. Well, the doctor never did a duty to warn or anything of that nature. So what happened is obviously Tatiana died. Which was pretty sad. That's kind of like the very long, semi-short version of all that, but that's kind of how all this started, is with Tarasoff, the Tarasoff law. So there's a big difference between what a lot of people don't know is duty to warn, duty to protect. There's privileged communication, which is actually legal jargon. And again, this is what my co-sponsor usually does, but duty to warn is actually the foreseeable victims. So this is kind of what they were gearing this by back in the day, is foreseeable victims. I think some of this is now changing nowadays. It's depending upon which state you get into, and we're going to get into that here in just a minute. So essentially, duty to protect, based upon Tarasoff 2, is when a therapist determines that his patient presents a serious danger of violence to another, he incurs the obligation to use reasonable care to protect the intended victim against such danger. And this is where it gets a little sticky, because not every state has a duty to protect or duty to warn. So this is where it gets a little weird. And I think, and I have it later on, we'll get into what New Mexico has, but that's the duty to protect. I know that even in our department, before I took over, we would get calls about things like this, and it would go to the desk personnel or to somebody, and they would just completely disregard it because it didn't matter to them anyway. They didn't understand the duty to warn, duty to protect law. So essentially, confidentiality is kind of like the demonstration of respect given to the client by the counselor, okay? Privileged communication, although it's not absolute, is actually just legal doctrine, okay? So privileged communication means that the counselor respects the client, and the counselor is not going to divulge whatever that client happens to tell him. So Tarasoff applicable today? Yes, I believe Tarasoff is very applicable today. It still requires a therapist to decide severity of the threat. Tarasoff only applies to threats of death. So I could sit here and say all day that I want to go and I want to punch you in the face, but no one can really do anything about that. They can only do it if I say, I want to go kill you. Then someone can do something about it. The biggest thing here, obviously, is violence cannot be predicted. That's always going to be a big key takeaway. So here's some duty to protect facts. So as you can see, there's 29 states and DC have statutes pertaining to discharging duty to protect. And this is as of 2018. This is when we put this together. And we modified it a little bit in 2019. Some states only allow for a warning as an exception to privileged communication. Other states merely have case law. So they have no statutes regarding duty to warn, duty to protect at all. And of the 30 statutes, only 26 specifically mention contacting the police. So as you can see, all over the United States, it completely varies no matter where you are. Now, again, this is as of, I think we did this in 2019. So there's no federal mandate and a great variation between the states when it comes to all this. All include therapists, some include psychiatrists, some of the statutes include practicing mental health providers, et cetera, and some of them don't specify. Some allow for a warning for protection for breaking confidentiality, some of them don't. Some mandate it. 6 have no statutes and are just going by common law. So that you can see how varied and weird this is all across the United States. I think here's some really interesting. New York permits the breach. It rejects terrace off and there is no legal obligation. I mean, you would think New York would be a little ahead of the times, but maybe not. New Mexico, again, you guys need to tell me about this one, but New Mexico, evidently you guys don't have a statute or common law for guidance. Is that true?
The clinicians or doc want to answer that? I'm not sure.
Could you repeat the question?
So based upon the research and data that I have, it says that New Mexico does not have any statute or common law guidance when it comes to duty to warn, duty to protect.
We were all taught that we have to do it. It's also the factor that's missing in this is it just best practices.
Yeah.
So even if it's not specifically in the law and you don't do it, it's best practices and you could be held liable for that.
Okay. Yeah, because when we were teaching this or going over this at a conference, it just varies state to state, and no matter where you go. I mean, it even varies here, and like within our own state, it even varies here. Like Missouri, we actually do have a mandatory duty to warn, and duty to protect is actually codified actually in the statute that we have.
I don't know of any state where, like, if you do it, that's bad. And I think pretty much it's best practice as far as I know everywhere.
It is, but sometimes we get into the hang up of, well, I don't have to because it's not mandated. I don't have to do it, that kind of thing. And that's kind of where we find there's no federal mandate regarding any of this.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah. So like even here in Missouri, if I try to do an involuntary commit for somebody, and I know how St. Louis City works, but if I have to go to another county because for some reason that person lives in another county, but he keeps coming to St. Louis to do whatever, I can't do the affidavit here. I need to do it down in that particular county. Well, that judge does it completely different, has a whole different ball of wax, and it's a whole different form and a whole different everything. I can't use what I normally do there. So even with your own states, it will actually vary county to county.
In our state, I don't think there's explicit laws saying you have to do it, but there's explicit laws saying we can break confidentiality in order to do it.
Yeah. It's just kind of it varies a lot no matter where you go, I think, and it depends upon like you said earlier, it depends upon getting the right person to talk to. Can sometimes be part of that. So here's a few things that out of all that I kind of want to stress to take away is, one, be familiar, and you guys are already, but not everyone always is, but be familiar with who can write involuntary commitments. For instance, federal FBI guys are not considered first responders here in the state of Missouri. So they can't write an affidavit for committal or anything of that nature. They have to call me or my unit or whatever to get that done. So law enforcement can do it, but they can't do it. So what are the requirements for your jurisdiction? Like I just said, there can be different requirements. St. Louis City has completely different requirements than someone who's way, way out in rural Missouri who doesn't really understand this and who only, rarely sees anything like this. Completely different. So be very familiar with your requirements for your jurisdiction. And then obviously, know your probate commissioner, know your probate judge, your public administrator, who are they? I had mine on speed dial if I ever needed a question. There you go. Whoop, hey, it's just your friendly neighborhood sergeant or lieutenant calling again. So that was always very helpful because he was the bomb, always willing to work with me on everything, and we'd work together as a team, which was a beautiful thing. So now it's time for the boring stuff, and I'm really sorry this stuff gets a little dry. I will try to make it as fun as I can, but we're gonna head into this. Does anyone have any questions so far or comments about any of that duty to warn, duty to protect stuff, which is not 100% my forte? Nothing? Okay, we'll just shoot on forward here. And you guys, you probably know a lot of this stuff already. And in fact, I'm sure all of you know this stuff. So I've kind of gathered a lot of the FBI and Secret Service stuff and put into this particular presentation. So I hope you find it beneficial. So here are the few things that I like to remind people, because we hear all the time that, oh, they just snapped. It's all over mainstream media. It's all over, Facebook, it's all over. What pick a medium, it's all over it. Oh, they just snapped. Oh, he was fine yesterday. He must have just snapped. Well, no one just snaps. They always decide. There's always a decision process here. And that's kind of that one of those things that kind of like tease me off a little bit, because people just don't do that. But hey, you know, it grabs people's attention. So let's do it that way. Obviously, targeted violence is highly individualized. However I'm going to do it, however anyone else is going to do it, it's going to be just based upon them and what they want to do and how they want to do it. It is gender neutral, although we have seen more men do it or males do it than females. It is gender neutral because there is no actual profile for an active shooter or a target person who commits an act of targeted violence, I should say. Prevention is a process and it's fluid, so be flexible. The biggest thing with that is I always find people like they get into this very strict rut of, well, this is what I have to do and this I have to do it in this order and whatever. But these things aren't like that, and people aren't in little columns. We're not in this little silo. People are all over the place, and our investigations regarding any of this need to be very fluid and flexible in order to kind of go with that flow. And here's something, I don't know, but this was, God, when was it? 2008-ish, somewhere in that area, I think it was. We actually had an active shooter, an active targeted violence here in Kirkwood, Missouri, which is not too far from the city. And they were calling for mutual aid, and all on the, you know, for the next several days, it was all over the news. Well, what they kept doing was the news media kept calling the perpetrator of this by his nickname that everyone in like Kirkwood who knew him called him by his nickname. And his nickname was Cookie Thornton. His nickname is Cookie and his last name is Thornton. I can't even remember his first name, only due to the fact that everyone called him Cookie for so long. I can't even remember it off the top of my head. So when we use nicknames for the individuals who commit these crimes, that's not a good thing. Always just use their first name, their last name, use them by their last name, whatever it may be, but don't glamorize them by making them into this martyr or nicknames and all that kind of stuff, because I just tend to find that, you know, based upon the research I've done, it glamorizes, you know, that particular person and the act that they've done, which obviously is not a good thing. So I like this one because, you know, not everyone who poses a threat actually commits the act, or rather communicates it, I should say. And that's the one thing we need to know. Just because, you know, we think we've got a handle on everybody doesn't mean that they're always going to communicate it. Some people do communicate it, but there are a few that don't. So we can't always lock ourselves in. And then, of course, you know, the one thing I tell everyone is everyone's like, Sal, it doesn't make sense. I don't understand why they did it. I don't understand. I said, we don't have to understand it. They're the ones who understand it. And it's because of them. They're the ones who are doing it. They're the ones perpetrating a crime, but it makes sense to them. It may not make sense to us, but it does make sense to them. And we just kind of have to remember that type of thing, because everyone wants to, including myself, we want to go, why? I don't have any answers. I don't understand how. I don't understand why this happened. And sometimes we may or may not know, but remember, it only has to make sense actually to them. So I think that's kind of a tipping point there for some. Here are some barriers. I'm going to run through these real quick. I'm not going to go label these off for anybody or anything like that. But here are barriers that comes to a lot of the investigations that I find with talking with other investigators who do very similar things with CIT. Even when I was working with the FBI threat management team here in St. Louis and with county, I mean, sometimes you'll be talking to somebody and there's all these barriers because, again, they have this very focused way of thinking. You know, people want to look at, well, they have a diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever, and, you know, they immediately go for the fact that, you know, there's a potential for violence there. Well, what does the behavior say, right? So it's behavior versus diagnosis. Lawmakers, we all have these, you know, let me see, court systems can be a challenge. We all know that. We've all been there, kind of done that. But we also have our own personal biases that we can bring into investigations, and we have to remember to kind of clear out those cobwebs so that we don't do that. So those are some of the barriers I just want to bring to your attention when we're doing things like this. So here's some barriers to reporting. And I think that, like, particularly talking about, high school or middle-aged students, middle school students, whatever, no one wants to be a snitch, right? We didn't when we were kids. I can't imagine it's changed much today. Some people are afraid to say anything because they don't want to be wrong, right? There's always that uncertainty. They don't want to be humiliated also if they were wrong, or like, oh, what that person said, or embarrass any of these. So any of these are barriers to reporting. And I think that, like, one way that I'll talk about a little bit later, like to help break down some of these barriers, is when you're creating when you're creating a policy and you're addressing how is some of this reporting going to be done? Well, some schools have had created anonymous apps that people can turn it, kids can turn it in anonymously, or an email or something, but they have a policy around it, but they create it where that there's no barriers to the reporting. So kids don't have to feel, or even adults don't have to feel that, oh my God, what if I'm wrong? What if I embarrass myself? I don't want to be known as a snitch, so these are some really big factors that I think we need to pay attention to when creating policy. And I'll get a little bit more into it later. Yeah, let me touch on that one again. So this kind of goes along with this. So in the FBI book that I have for their threat management, I really like how they did this. We all say, look at the bystanders, look at the bystanders. Well, they change it from being a bystander to being an upstander, which I really, really like. We want kids to be upstanders, not bystanders. We even want sometimes adults to be upstanders, not bystanders. And we need to make it okay for them to be that way. We need to listen. What if, there's always that example of, what? 10-year-old little Jimmy came over to me the other day and was really concerned about his dad, and I didn't listen to him, right? Or we just shoved off the little kid going, oh, it's all right. Daddy has a couple things going on, but he's fine. But we don't really listen to the child or, the young adult that's maybe expressing their opinion. And so that's why I kind of like this slide, just for that particular reason. So the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights, obviously the First Amendment teaches us, we have, the right to free speech. Yes. But what is freedom of speech? So in my research, along with looking through stuff and training with the FBI guys on this, this is kind of actually taken straight from the book. Not all forms of speech are protected. If I ran into a movie theater or a transport, like a train station, or Lambert International Airport or something, and did anything else like that and said fire or gun or whatever, what do you think would happen to me if that was, I can't say, hey, that's freedom of speech. Doesn't really work that way. So there actually are limits to some of this. So again, not all forms of speech are protected. The Constitution actually does draw a line at protected speech that advocates for violence or conduct that actually leads to violence or other unlawful activity. It doesn't protect against true threats. And then, and I directly took this out of the book. The threatener intends to communicate a serious expression of intent to commit unlawful violence against an individual or group. He need not intend to actually carry out the threat. And that is the actual definition from the Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court defines what a true threat is, I should say. I think that is really pretty critical, that we need to hold on to that little definition sometimes and fight for it a little bit more. But that's the essence of what we sometimes need to go up against. So talking about some definitions, I pulled a whole bunch of definitions together. And the reason why I did this is I want people to use or to get used to similar terminology and to use very similar terminology. I always suggest, but practice is to use terminology that is what the national kind of standard is, so to speak, like FBI, Secret Service use very similar terminology. And I think that law enforcement needs to adopt that very same terminology, because that way we're all on the same page and we all know what we're talking about. If we have to call another jurisdiction, we have to call another state for whatever reason. I've called other states before, and I'm sure you guys have too, for something that's come into your state that's actually over there in another state, and we're talking completely two different languages, even though we're meaning the same thing, but it's totally different. So these are some very simple definitions that are used by the Secret Service and the FBI. I just think that they explain a lot and are very short and succinct to the point. No, we don't need to get into that right now. So here's the purpose of a threat assessment. And I am trying to go through this pretty quickly so that we don't run out of too much time. Unfortunately, there's a lot to cover. But most people don't understand the purpose of a threat assessment. And what it really is it's proactive. We're trying to get ahead of something, and we're not trying to be reactive. And the purpose of a threat assessment is essentially to intervene in that or to change that person's course or direction before they commit a predatory act. Obviously, that encompasses several different things. But that's the actual purpose of a threat assessment. But I've completely lost my mind. There we go. Sorry, I didn't mean to lose my mind there for a second. But the ideology of what this stands behind is that we have to understand that the threat actor is also in a state of crisis. We don't know what that crisis is. We don't know where it came from necessarily, but we know that that person is having some type of crisis. It could be a mental health issue, or it could be a personal conflict. We don't know. But we're not predicting violence. We're trying to find out if that person actually poses a threat. I'll get into that a little bit more. But the other part of the ideology of this is that any threat assessment is not based upon our assumptions, our beliefs, our personal biases, anything like that. It is an evidence-based practice. And we need to take what evidence we have and line that up and look at it and see what we have. And what I've talked to other officers who've done similar things, sometimes you can see them starting to bring in their own bias, oh, well, he's got this, or he's got this, or whatever the case may be. I'm like, no, we really need to step back and look at things from a different point of view. So I just kind of want to remind everyone, remember, when you're doing your threat assessment, no matter where you're at in it, always make it evidence-based, because that is going to be your saving grace to anything that happens later on. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, obviously the central question to a threat assessment is, does the person pose a threat? Not if they are making, or not if they've made a threat, or are they a threat? It's if they pose a threat. And if you can answer that question, then you're 10 steps ahead, I think. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit into more the nuts and bolts here. And this is about team approach. So do you guys have a threat management or threat assessment team within your CIT, or is that your whole team, or does your school districts have a threat management team?
It's usually our unit that does most of the threat assessments if that person is suspected of having mental illness or substance use, stuff like that.
What about for your schools? Do you know?
That's us too. Yeah,
That
our
is it
school.
too? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I know again, it's different everywhere. Is yours a multidisciplinary team?
we have officers, clinicians, and psychiatrists, I guess, as far as the multidisciplinary. And I think we also consult with FBI in some cases, or Secret Service, whoever needs to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I was curious just because a lot of times they don't have a team approach to this or a multidisciplinary team approach to this. And what I've always suggested to law enforcement or schools, corporations, whatever, make your team completely multidisciplinary. If you're coming from a school, include your SRO, include your CIT officers, include juvenile, include DJOs, include the court system, include your psychiatrists or mental health workers, include, obviously you need to include people from the school as well. Who's going to represent the school? You're going to probably need a few people as well. So it's not so one-sided, but there's this big multidisciplinary team that can bring in other aspects of their thought process or what they're seeing from their side, from their training, et cetera, and then working together as that unit. I've just found that not everyone does it. It's usually just a very small 1 or 2 people, 2 or 3 people, something like that, that's actually making up the team. And I'm like, oh, we really need to try for a bigger team. So best practices are to have a multidisciplinary approach and as many people as you can get in there, obviously with restrictions, but so getting into policy just a little bit. So do you guys have a written policy then for your threat management team?
I don't believe we do, unless someone knows something different.
Okay. The best practices, that the FBI and the Secret Service always recommend doing is having not only the multidisciplinary team, which will be addressed in your policy. I should have addressed this first, but you want a written policy. And that way it's protecting you as well as the organization. Everything that you do is based upon this. So when you establish that policy, obviously you're going to have the purpose of the threat assessment. Hey, this is an evidence-based practice, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have those definition of terms like this is what a threat is. This is the threat actor. This is, vulnerability, risk, et cetera. All those different things you're going to lay out in your policy. You want to include in your policy, and we'll touch on all these, but obviously the team we already touched on, media, behavior, the threat assessment methodology, how is it going to be done? The ideology, which I've just briefly discussed before, and obviously the purpose and documentation, and then notification. All those different aspects need to be addressed in your policy. This is not, it's not going to be a short little thing to write up. It's going to be a little bit long, but again, this is going to protect you legally on the other side as well. So obviously define a threat assessment, team goal and composition. So what's the goal of the threat assessment that you guys do? What is it going to encompass? What's going to be a part of it? So here's just one I put together in here as an example. This is not my department's or the city's policy whatsoever. So just kind of disclaimer right there. This is just something I wrote as an example, but this is something you would like to see for your purpose statement for the threat assessment. So if you guys want to take any of that, whatever you want, I can always send you a screenshot of it later as well. But it kind of encompasses everything. To establish a joint school and or workplace balanced threat assessment team within the blah, 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 wherever that happens to be. The team is comprised of a multidisciplinary consort designed to take a proactive approach to interrupt or intervene a person or group's direction to commit an act of targeted predatory violence against another group or individual. The team's assessment is used to answer the question of whether the person or group poses a threat or if they are a threat. The team will employ evidence-based techniques and strategies to assess, intervene, respond to predatory threats or acts of violence and threats of predatory violence. So that's kind of an all-encompassing thing, but it has all the main points in there. So again, I want to stress this again, utilize the definitions that are recognized kind of at the national level. I think that keeps us all on the same page. And then if we're all on the same page and we're all learning the same stuff, it's going to work a lot smoother, I think. So include in there threat actor, risk, vulnerability, threat levels. We'll get into threat levels towards the end. I like threat levels. I think those are really good because they kind of give us a statue where we're at. So kind of back to the team again. You want to obviously define how the team is chosen. Right? Is it just going to be some random person, like you're being voluntold to do this, or what's the criteria for that selection? You want to define your frequency of meetings. You want to also look at the fact when are you going to have the frequency of meetings when you're investigating someone versus when there's this is again around the whole school, or school district. But yeah, when are you going to take a look at the teams and team meetings? Number of members, how many members you're going to have. Obviously, this is not all encompassing. So we're going to, there has to be a process. Define their roles, define their responsibilities. Again, that's going to be a very important thing. And then obviously articulate the goals of meetings if no active threats are being evaluated at that time. So what this does is kind of lays out, this starts your process of laying out everything for what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and who's going to do it. This is one of my faves. Can anyone guess why this is one of my faves? No? Well, I'll give you a hint. So what happens if you have more than one person talking about a scene? Out of curiosity.
Mixed messages.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Big time. So, if we would have, something here, well, we did several years ago, I think closer to, I think it was 2011, we had the AB, not Anheuser-Busch, but it was, actually it was right across from my old station house, like quarter of a mile from it. We had an active shooter there. And what happens when you have like different entities in different parts of the schools and different districts and all these people converging, you tend to get more than one person talking about what happened, what occurred, and then facts start to get garbled. And different messages are sent, mixed messages are sent, inaccurate information is given, etc. So what you want to do is, no matter how many entities are involved, always have one prime spokesman, and then obviously a backup or two. But the point of this is you want to all state the exact same message. If you're giving too many mixed messages, which we've all seen it on other acts of targeted violence throughout the United States and everywhere, one person is saying one thing, someone's saying something else, and it's all this, and no one knows what the facts are, and no one knows what really happened or what's going on. So in dealing with the media, you would definitely want to have a prime spokesperson. So pick that out ahead of time. And then who is their backup if they're for some reason unavailable or whatever case, who's it going to be, and then make sure that everyone's working together. If you guys are on a scene together, everyone's communicating, okay, here's our message. This is what we're going to say. This is what we're going to talk about. And these are the facts. And we're not going to get into extraneous little, stuff that are floating around out there in the back that we don't need to give right now. Because we also know some of these are active investigations. So we can only give away so much. Also in your policy, you want to define behavior. Particularly this is important, I think, for schools, obviously for workplaces as well. But if we're going to talk specifically schools, they definitely want to define behavior. What's acceptable behavior? What is unacceptable behavior? What kind of behavior is going to get law enforcement drawn in? What kind of behavior is included in social media? Like, are you going to say, hey, no, you can't say stuff like that on Facebook? What? And then also you want to do is define the consequences. What are the consequences going to be for these acts if you violate this policy? You know, obviously define the boundaries for criminal behavior, et cetera. So, and, you know, and here's something that is kind of probably odd to look at, but you also want to include the school district employees on some of this and visitors, because they're all subject to state law. So you want to make sure that everyone has an understanding, a very clear understanding, like, hey, these are acceptable, these aren't acceptable, this is consequences, here's what's going to happen, and this is when we're going to bring law enforcement in if it comes to this particular end. So all right. So here's some of the methodology regarding a threat assessment. Obviously, in your policy, you want to define the assessment, the process for methodology, what's going to be addressed, what's not going to be addressed. We kind of did this a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But the main point is, again, you want to make sure that people understand and people in your group understand that you're asking the question, does someone pose a threat? Not, are they a threat? Documentation. I know as law enforcement, I already know this answer to everyone's looking at me going, oh my God, I hate reports. Yes. However, with that being said, we all need to document. And the better we do it, the better off it will be for everybody involved. So when it comes to building your best practice, or when it comes to creating your policy, the best practices are really, how are you going to document this stuff? Where is it going to be stored? Who's going to have access to it? Right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into these threat assessment policies. They're like ginormous, I think. You know, how are you going to determine format? What's going to be HIPAA? What's not HIPAA? What's confidentiality versus privileged? How are you going to address that? Right? So that's some of the things you're going to have to address in there. So probably bring in your legal team as well on some of the stuff to help you out with it. But yeah, documenting is going to be very, very important. So here's threat notifications. And again, we're talking specifically schools here, but as you all know, kids, even teachers, don't always speak up when we know that they should. Okay. So how are we going to help kids or even teachers, you know, to get notified? How are we going to be notified if something's going on? So some schools have created apps that are private. Some have created, you know, email junkets that they can, you know, people can send an email to anonymously. And again, in your policies, you want to state around that, hey, if you're concerned about someone and you're expressing a legitimate concern, whether this pans out or not, you will not be in trouble. Because of course, everyone's afraid of being embarrassed or in trouble about something. And we don't want that, because that just discourages them from actually notifying somebody. So we want to keep them where that they feel confident in notifying someone. However, that being said, you also want to discourage the fact that because some little goofball over here on the side wants to go, hey, let's play a prank and say this person's X, Y, and Z, and they're doing a prank. Well, guess what? There's going to be consequences for behavior like that. So create some type of a notification system. And how are you guys going to be notified? What if something is going on social media at 4 o'clock in the morning and you guys don't know about it because they're on a private chat room or whatever the case may be, and someone needs to get a hold of you? So think about all that kind of stuff that goes in your policy. So obviously, when it gets to the actual assessment part, we're going to identify, assess, define, and include. So obviously we want to identify who the who the person is. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. We want to assess the individual, assess what's going on. Do they pose a threat? Do they not pose a threat? Are we able to get them resources that they need? Define their levels of threat categories, which we'll get into here in just a minute. And then obviously include guidelines for case management and post-intervention. I think that's very helpful too. We want to, it was said earlier, and I can't remember where it was on LinkedIn. What is her name? Randazzo. She has a threat management group. And one of the biggest things that she says, we need to wrap people in services that are in crisis and just wrap them up in services, which is extremely good if we can get them to the services and keep them there. What I tend to find is that we get them to that original service, and then once they're released or they're not wrapped up in a whole bunch of different people for supporting them, they just go right back to that old behavior, and we start it all over again. So obviously, who's the threat actor? Evaluate the information, determine priority. Obviously, we want discretion in all this. We're not going to go gangbusters into someone's home or into the school, fully armed to the teeth with a SWAT team and going, hey, we heard that you wanted to, harm some people. There has to be some level of discretion there. We don't want to just go gangbusters in when we don't have all the facts yet. Obviously, that could be variant upon what the circumstances are. We may need to go gangbusters in someplace. Obviously, you guys are going to do a systematic approach to the assessment, multiple source evaluation. So what I always say about multiple source evaluation is don't just take one person's word for it. They may have kicked off the investigation. Now we're looking into it. Well, what else can we do? Who else can we talk to about this particular individual? School counselors, teachers, parents, other relatives, other friends that they have. Don't just take one person's word for it. I've had it several times where I've had somebody call in and say something about their family member. And really what it turned out to be is they were just mad at the family member because of whatever reason. And it was completely just blown out of proportion. So just kind of FYI to that. So when we're doing our investigations, I stole these from the Secret Service. It's all right. It's the Secret Service 11. I really like them. Don't tell them that, but hey, kidding. I'm retired. So these 11 questions, I think, are actually, I've used them to state them in my own way, et cetera, that kind of thing. But I really like these questions. For instance, does a person have a trusting relationship with at least one responsible adult? Hey, that's a good thing to know, right? Because if they do, then we have a good trusted party that we need to bring in, that we can talk to, right? Does a person or group leader believe that violence is an acceptable or desirable way to solve problems? These are some of the questions that we want to try to answer in our investigation. Conversations or story consistent with their actions? Are other people concerned about their potential for violence? Yes or no? Maybe. What circumstances may affect the likelihood of violence? And then, the last few here. What are the motives and goals of that individual? Like, what are they trying to accomplish if they do this act of violence? Have there been any communications to suggest an idea or intent on violence? I hate reading screens, but it's hard when I can't see all you guys. So, and obviously, as a person experienced hopelessness, isolation, desperation, despair, some other symptoms. We all know that, a person's who is depressed and sees, no way out, and they're just seeing nothing but a black hole. They can't go anywhere. It makes them more, the likelihood of potential violence against themselves for suicide. So here are some threat levels that, and you guys can, these are just best practice. You guys can make out however many threat levels you want. They can be 3, they can be 2, they can be however many you want. I like them just due to the fact that you can, you kind of know where on the spectrum somebody is. as far as that threat level goes. Obviously, I put in category 1 for me was imminent, threat is imminent, et cetera. And then defined each category out from there. So take this for what you will. I like it just because, again, it just gives that spectrum. We kind of have a better idea, and people are going to go up and down as their crises happens to go. So that's that flexibility in the investigation part. So warning behaviors for typology. I'm sure you guys have all heard the pathway to violence and studied that extensively. So I was doing some research and found this, and it's actually now it's in the FBI book. I didn't see it in the Secret Service book, but I did find it in the FBI book. So pathway identification, leakage, last resort fixation, energy burst, novel aggression, and then a direct threat. These warning behaviors are really good to kind of help figure out where like that person is, what kind of thinking they are, what is their behavior, what is their typology, how are they going to typically go. And so I have definitions down here on all of these. Obviously, you can find these for yourself, so I'm not going to read these to you. That would be really boring. But an energy burst, a lot of people didn't understand like what an energy burst was. So an energy burst is like when threat actors get really close to that time when they're about ready to act. They kind of get this energy burst, and they kind of go through a run through of the entire of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So you can see that in some of their behavior. When you retrace some people's steps, you can actually see them doing that. Leakage, there's always, I don't want to say always, many times, not always, many times there's some form of leakage. And leakage could be talking to a friend, talking to someone you know, putting something on social media. It could be anywhere, but there's a lot of times there is some sort of leakage, and it could just be also just in their behavior or their grumblings around the house. And, brothers and sisters and parents, grandparents don't pay any attention to it because it's just, it's a teenager grumbling. So just kind of FYI, I think these are very helpful to help see where that person's at, what their behavior is. So here's the progression. There's always some type of grievance. We don't always know what that grievance is. Sometimes they voice it, sometimes threat actors don't. But it starts with a grievance, and it kind of ruminates for a little while, and it marinates. And that's when it starts to, when it's marinating a little bit, and they've added a little, whatever to it, you start to get, these ideas. Oh, I would like to do this. If that was me, I would do this type of thing, right? So now you're getting into ideation. But that ideation can then turn to planning and research, because now they've taken it up a notch. Like we've all, a lot of people have thought, well, if that person ever does that to me, I'm going to punch him in the mouth, or whatever the case may be. But now they're actually, practicing boxing, and now they actually, they're researching on how to do this kind of stuff. So what are they researching? How are they researching it? Are they asking a lot of questions that's not typical for them? For instance, you have a kid who is not really, doesn't know anything about guns, but all of a sudden starts becoming interested in guns and weapons and how to do this, that, and the other thing. That's kind of atypical behavior for that kid. And for other kids, it may not be atypical behavior, completely normal. So what's gonna be the planning and research? Now they're preparing, they're gathering all their stuff. They're going to start to rehearse it at some point. This is the breach is right beforehand. It's kind of a little practice run, and then the actual attack itself. So this is actually the progression of the pathway to violence. But it always starts with a grievance. I don't know if any of you guys remember, but this is several years ago. I think it was at a video game conference in Florida. You guys remember that? Okay. So I did a little research on it a while back, and it like fit right in here for like the perfect example. The kid who actually ended up coming in and then doing the act of targeted violence, he got humiliated because he got beat by another kid who, used to lose him all the time. And the kid who did the act was like the world champ or United States champ, whatever he was. Anyway, he was some type of bigwig in the video game world, and he got beat by someone who'd never beat him before, and all this kind of stuff. So he's really humiliated. So he actually went out to his car, got his gun, and came back in and shot him. So that's that little grievance there. It's just that we ramped up real quick on that one. But that's just a grievance, right? So it's amazing what little things can do sometimes. So again, pathway to violence, revenge, justice, notoriety, problem solving. They wish to kill or just be killed. That's their goals. So threat enhancers, obviously, these can enhance the threat to varying degrees. You have history around mental health, access to weapons. We all know these, behavioral history, social and environmental areas. But has anyone ever heard of the ACE scores, the adverse childhood experience? So you guys can actually look that up. I'll tell you about it, but you can actually look into it and look. It's really good. So if schools do an adverse childhood experience, depending upon how you rate, is your level of trauma then as a child. You can even do this for adults and see what your level of trauma was as a child. And it's kind of interesting to see, but it shows you kind of where you fall on, is it going to enhance this threat or not enhance it, like depending upon the level of trauma and violence you experience as a child. So really, really interesting stuff. But you can use those if these done in school. It can help you out quite a bit. Doc, have you ever done those? Yeah.
I mean, it's I haven't done the actual scoring, but you keep it in mind, and it comes up a lot in research too.
Yeah,
ACEs, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a good it's a good way to see someone's past and kind of what they've been through.
Yeah,
and sometimes
it's worthwhile.
you don't even, yeah, it is really worthwhile. It can tell you a lot of information. So do it. I would suggest, hey, you can use the information. You can use the information. That'd be great.
Yes.
Obviously managing, what are your mitigating responses going to be? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? What's your, you want to employ the appropriate response. You don't want to go overboard. You don't want to go too far under either. What's going to be it? And then obviously here's the big one. We can get tons of people into services all day long, but unless we follow up and follow up and follow up some more and stay close into them, people can go off the rails again for a variety of reasons. We had a guy, God, how tall was he? 7 foot, something like that. Big boy, very big boy. I'm 5'2". So I'm literally like looking up straight up like that. And you guys can laugh, by the way, because it's so true. But one of my CIT officers and I went out there, and he does have a mental illness. He does manage it, but sometimes he goes off a little bit. And his mom is very, very ill. And he will start to go on rants about, when my mom dies, I'm just going to kill everybody I see. And he does have access to weapons. It's a delicate case, but we went there and we made friends with him. And he said I was cool, which, I was very happy about that. Gave him my phone number. The other officer gave him his phone number so he can call us anytime he gets mad or angry, or if his mom's not feeling well and he's getting to that point, he wants to start to explode and whatever, he can call. Because we had numerous call outs to him within like a 2-week time frame. It was just absolutely insane. So once we got to make friends with him, that all went by the wayside, because he just would call us then at any time, night or day. I'm really mad. Okay, let's talk it through. So, and that was just, for us, that was just part of that follow-up process for him. Because he was actually really pretty good on his medication, but he would get very upset because of his mom being she's gravely ill. She is going to die due to kidney disease. So that's kind of what set him off. So that is, without going into any of that stuff, although this is really interesting, it will run way past our time. So I'm not going to get into that, but we actually do have some incel stuff and things like that. Chad's and the Stacy's. So anyway, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I have it. I should have it. Here it is. This is my contact info. This is just all my personal info. If anyone has any questions, please just, reach out. I can email you whatever information, you need or answer anything. Again, we usually go a lot more in depth. I just tried to keep it high level for right now, but if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to help you out.
Thanks so much, Lieutenant Panzer. Great information. I would actually be interested in hearing the whole thing, so I'll probably get with you about that. Anybody have any questions right now for Lieutenant Panzer?
You may have answered this already, but how long were you doing this as part of your career?
So I started doing threat assessments in 2017. It wasn't very formalized then. I was just learning. So I had to do a lot of research and make some connections and learn all about all of this stuff. And once I started doing that, it worked a lot better. So.
Very good.
Other questions?
Here, I can stop share, can I? Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Lieutenant. Again, I'll probably be reaching out to see if we can get the whole thing scheduled for some time. Really appreciate your expertise and giving us some training. For everybody else on the network, we don't have a presentation title for next week, but I promise it'll be something good. So looking forward to seeing all you guys back here next Tuesday, 1:30. If there's nothing else, I hope everybody has a great week. Take care.